Every night for 9 years, since the week she left Lagos with nothing but a bag and a secret, Kioma Eze has checked the latch on her gate before she checks on her son. Not because Umuoji has thieves worth worrying about, but because she decided a long time ago that if a certain car ever turned onto that road, she wanted 3 extra seconds to get her son out of sight. The boy is 8 years old. His father is Ikena Okafor, the kind of name that gets a table cleared in any restaurant in Lagos without him having to ask twice. And in 8 years, Ikena has never once heard his son's name. Kioma made sure of that. She never had to explain the drill to Nanamdi in words. He learned it the way children learn the sound of their own name, moving to the back room the second she touches 2 fingers to the doorframe. She has never once needed those 3 seconds. Tonight, that changes. 9 years of watching that road, and tonight is the night it finally answers back. If you want to see how this ends, and it does not end the way you think, stay with us to the last minute. Tap like, hit subscribe if this is your first time here, and type your city in the comments. Let's see how far this one travels tonight. The car that turns onto the Umuoji Road at 10 past 7 moves the way an expensive thing moves when it knows its own worth. Kioma knows it before she reaches the window. Tonight, she is not wrong. Musa parks 2 car lengths back from wherever his Oga is going, a habit built over 11 years of driving a man who does not like to be watched arriving anywhere. He leaves the engine running. He has learned not to turn it off on nights like this one. Nights when Ikena sits in the back for the last 20 minutes of a drive without saying a word, working his jaw the way he does before a meeting he already knows will go badly. Ikena does not wait to be let out of the car. He has stopped waiting for that these last 2 years. Small, ordinary things he now insists on doing himself as if they might prove something to no one in particular. He walks up a red earth path with weeds growing through the cracks in it and stops at a gate made of corrugated zinc painted blue once, rust showing through now in the shape of old rain. He knocks 3 times, evenly spaced, like a man who has rehearsed the number in the car. The woman who opens it is smaller than he remembers, or he is misremembering the version of her that used to move through his mother's house in Ikoyi carrying trays she never let anyone help her with. Kioma Eze does not smile. She does not gasp or step back or do any of the things a stranger might expect from a woman meeting, 9 years later, a man who ruined a week of her life without ever noticing he'd done it. She looks at him the way people look at weather they have been tracking for a long time. "You found me," she says. It isn't a question. I wasn't looking. Not until 3 weeks ago. That part is true, at least. He hadn't gone looking for Kioma Eze. He had gone looking for a name in his late wife's old address book, trying to make sense of 7 years of marriage that ended with more secrets in it than he'd known to grieve. Kioma's name had been the last one written there, in Ronka's small, careful hand with no note beside it. Everyone else in that book had a note, a birthday, a place, a nickname. Kioma had nothing. It took Ikena 3 weeks to understand that the absence of a note was itself a piece of information. "Then you should go back to not looking," Kioma says, and starts to close the door. That is when the boy steps into the gap. He is 8, narrow through the shoulders the way boys are before they aren't anymore, and he has a school notebook tucked under one arm like he was in the middle of something when the knock came. He doesn't speak. He looks at Ikena the way children look at a shape they haven't sorted yet. Not afraid, not friendly, just cataloging. And then he does the thing that stops Ikena's next sentence in his throat before it can form. He taps 2 fingers against his own thigh, 3 times, fast, the way a man taps a pen against a board table when the person across from him is lying and hasn't finished lying yet. More than one person has told Ikena over the years, usually while trying to flatter him, that he has a tell. Rita in legal noticed it first. 3 fast taps, always 3, whenever a negotiation was about to turn. In 41 years, he had never once met another person who did it. He had assumed, without ever putting the thought into words, that it belonged to him alone. Namdi. Kiyoma's voice has gone flat and urgent at once. Inside. The boy doesn't go inside. He looks at his mother, then back at Akena, then taps his fingers again. Once this time, slower, like he's testing whether the first three were an accident. They were not. Kiyoma's hand finds his shoulder, not gently. She turns him with the kind of grip that has done this before, that has practiced this exact motion in the dark more times than she would ever admit to anyone. And for one full second, before the door swings shut between them, Ikena Okafor sees his own face on an 8-year-old boy he did not know existed 40 minutes ago. He understands with the specific sickening clarity of a man who feels a bridge start to move under his own feet, that whatever he drove 3 hours to apologize for is not the thing he is actually guilty of. The door doesn't slam. It closes the way doors close in houses where somebody has learned, over years, not to wake the neighbors. Ikenna stands on the wrong side of it in the dark with the sound of a latch dropping into place, and for a long moment he does not move at all. Behind him, Musa has still not turned off the engine. He knocks again. No answer. He sits down on the single concrete step in front of the gate, which is not something the chairman of a company with 14,000 employees does anywhere else in his life. And he stays there long enough that Musa eventually cuts the engine after all and gets out to stand near him, saying nothing, the way he has said nothing through worse nights than this one. Ronk knew, Ikenna says, to no one. She knew, and she never told me. Musa looks at the closed gate for a while before he answers. Some things people carry so long, sir, they forget they were ever meant to put them down. It is, Ikenna will think much later, a strange thing for a driver to say. He does not think about it that night. That night, he is thinking about a boy's fingers tapping against a school notebook and a woman's careful handwriting with no note beside one single name and the particular shape of a silence that has just gotten 9 years louder. He does not sleep in Umuoji. There is nowhere in Umuoji for a man like him to sleep without every soul in the village knowing his business by sunrise. And some part of him, the part still capable of shame, does not want that yet, not until he understands what he is ashamed of. He and Musa drive back to Lagos in the dark, past checkpoints and closed markets and the black shapes of hills he cannot name, and somewhere past Ore, staring at nothing out the window, Ikenna Okafor makes the first honest promise he has made to anyone in 2 years. He is going to find out exactly what his wife did, and then he is going to fix it however long it takes, whether or not the woman behind that blue gate ever opens it for him again. 9 years earlier, on the last Friday in March, a version of Ikenna Okafor existed that almost no one who knows him now would recognize. He was 26. His father had died 18 months before that, of a heart that had been quietly failing since long before anyone thought to check it, and Ikenna had inherited a company 2 years before he was ready to run one, in an industry where 30-year veterans still called him the boy behind his back and, occasionally, to his face. That week, Meridian had lost the Bonny offshore contract, 2 years of negotiation, a dozen flights to Abuja, a bid he had built his father's old team around, to a rival firm with half the experience and twice the political connections. He had not told his fiancée. He had not told anyone. He put on a tuxedo and went to a fundraiser for the children's ward at St. Augustine's because his mother was co-chairing it, and missing it would have meant answering questions he did not have the energy to answer. He does not remember most of that night. He remembers standing near the drinks table, alone, doing the math on what one failed bid actually meant for the next 2 years. And he remembers a tray of champagne nearly tipping when the girl carrying it, not a guest, staff, the kind of person a room like that is built to look through, caught his eye instead of apologizing, and asked, quietly, whether he was going to eat anything all night or just stand there being unhappy at the shrimp. Nobody had spoken to him like that in over a year. Everyone else in his life had already started handling him. Her name was Kioma. She told him that much and nothing else. not where she worked, not that she had been on staff at his own mother's house for 2 years already, a fact he would only piece together with real shame much later. And for 11 minutes, in a service corridor behind the ballroom where she had gone to fetch more napkins, and he had followed without entirely deciding to, he told a stranger the truth about the Bonnie bid, about his father, about how tired he was of being 26 and responsible for everyone's mortgage but his own peace of mind. She did not tell him it would be fine. She did not perform sympathy the way people who wanted something from him always did. She asked one good question about the bid that made him realize he had missed something in the original terms, and then, when he ran out of words, she simply stood there with him in the noise of the kitchen on the other side of the door, not filling the silence with anything at all. What happened after that, neither of them would ever describe to anyone else in full, and it does not need describing here beyond what matters. That for one night, two people who had no business finding comfort in each other found it anyway, and that by morning, the version of Ekena Okafor who had said all of that out loud to a stranger was already ashamed of himself. In the specific way powerful young men are ashamed when they remember, in daylight, exactly how unguarded they had been the night before. He did not seek her out to explain himself. He saw her once more, 4 days later, crossing the courtyard at his mother's house with a laundry basket, and he said good morning in a voice so carefully professional that she stopped, just for a second, like she had been slapped somewhere that would not bruise where anyone could see it. He told himself that week that he was protecting his engagement. He told himself a lot of things that week. None of them, he would understand 9 years later, were actually about protecting anyone but his own comfort. A week after that, he was told the girl had left for a better position in Abuja. He did not ask which family. He did not ask for a forwarding address. He let himself be relieved and got married 17 days later in a ceremony with 400 guests and a band flown in from Accra, and did not think about Kioma Ize again with any real seriousness for 9 years. Not until a woman he had promised forever to was 2 years in the ground, and an address book with one unexplained name in it finally made him ask the question he should have asked a decade earlier. The lease on Ronka's old study has never been broken. 2 years after her funeral, the room at the back of the Ikoyi house still smells faintly of the tuberose perfume she wore only in the evenings, and nobody on staff has been told to change that. Ikenna goes in there on a Tuesday morning, alone, for the first time since the burial, and starts pulling books off shelves like a man looking for something he cannot name. He finds the address book by accident, inside a box of old greeting cards. He finds Chioma's name by looking for it, once he remembers. 3 weeks too late. A single detail from 9 years ago that he had filed away under things not worth revisiting. A housekeeper who left without notice, without her final month's pay, the week before his wedding. He had asked about her once. Ronki had told him the girl found better work in Abuja. He had believed her, the way a man believes a wife he has no reason yet to doubt. He does not go to Dele Adeyemi right away. He goes first to the one person in Lagos who has watched him more closely, for longer, and asked for less in return than anyone else alive. Musa has driven for the Okafor family for 11 years, which is long enough to know the difference between a normal bad week and whatever this is. He notices it the way he notices engine trouble before the dashboard does. Ikenna cancels 2 board meetings without explanation, has him drive past the old Ikoyi gate 3 separate times without going in, and once, at a red light on Awolowo Road, says Ronke's name out loud to the empty back seat like he's testing whether it still hurts the same way it used to. What Ikenna does not know, and has no reason to suspect, is that Musa has been carrying something for 9 years that would answer every question currently taking his employer apart. It lives in a tin trunk under Musa's bed in the boys' quarters, wrapped in a square of wax print cloth that used to be a wrapper his late mother wore to church. He was handed the contents on a Thursday afternoon 9 years ago by Dele Adeyemi himself in the driveway of the old Adeyemi compound, with instructions that were not phrased as a request. Burn it. Musa had said yes, sir, the way a driver says yes to a man who signs off on his salary through his sister's family, and he had carried the envelope home that same night, meaning to do exactly that. He still cannot explain, 9 years later, why he didn't. He has told himself different reasons at different times. That paper doesn't burn as easily as people think in the middle of rainy season, that he wanted proof of what he'd been asked to destroy in case anyone ever came asking, that some instinct older than his own reasoning told him a day like this one was coming. Whatever the real reason was, the envelope went into the trunk instead of the fire. And the trunk has moved with him through 3 different rooms and 11 years of quietly watching a man he respects walk further and further from a truth that was never his to know. He makes the decision on a Thursday, driving Ikenna home from a fourth canceled meeting in 9 days, watching employer stare out the window with the specific stillness of a man rehearsing an apology he does not yet have the facts to make properly. Sir, Musa says, at the gate of the Ikoyi house, before Ikenna can get out of the car. There is something in my quarters I have been keeping. I think it is yours. Ikenna sits with the tin trunk open on Ronka's old desk for 11 minutes before he touches anything sans inside it. Musa stands by the door, hands folded, the posture of a man waiting to be dismissed either from the room or from the job, and does not seem to care which. There is a bank transfer receipt first, 25 million naira, moved from an account in Ronka Adeyemi's maiden name, dated 8 days before the wedding, no memo line. Beneath it, a single folded sheet of Adeyemi family letterhead, the ink gone slightly brown at the edges. In handwriting, Ikenna has read on birthday cards and grocery lists and love notes tucked into his briefcase for 7 years. Delay. I need this handled before Saturday. She is 3 months along, she told me herself, crying like I should feel sorry for her, give her whatever she asks for, and make sure she is somewhere. Ikenna will never think to look. I am not doing this to be cruel. I am doing this because if he finds out now, 2 days before the church is booked, he will call the whole thing off out of guilt, not love, and spend the rest of his life resenting a child that isn't even his responsibility to raise. This is kinder. In 10 years, no one will remember her name. Burn this after R. Ikenna reads it 4 times. He does not cry, which surprises him more than the letter does. What he feels instead is something closer to falling, the specific, silent drop of a man who has just watched every year of a marriage he thought he understood get quietly reclassified as something else. She was 3 months along, he says finally, not really to Musa. Namdi is 8. That's, he stops, does the arithmetic properly this time, out loud, the way he should have done it 9 years ago if anyone had let him. March, 9 years back, at a fundraiser for St. Augustine's Children's Ward on the single worst night of his professional life. The week Meridian lost the Bonnie offshore bid after 2 years of work. The week his father's old business partners stopped returning his calls. The one night in a decade he let himself be comforted by someone instead of performing for them. December. Namdi would have been born in December. It fits exactly, in a way that leaves no room for the version of events where this could still, somehow, be a misunderstanding. Does anyone else know? He asks Musa. Only the 2 of them, sir, Madam and her brother, and now you. Musa hesitates, then adds, in the flat voice of a man who has decided the cost of honesty is smaller than the cost of 9 more years of silence, and me. Ikenna does not fire him. He does not even raise his voice. He stands, folds the letter back along its 9-year-old crease, and says, thank you for not burning it, in a tone that makes Musa understand, without either of them needing to say anything else, that his job has never been safer than it is at this exact moment. Dele Adeyemi keeps an office on the 11th floor of a building his family has owned since before independence. with a view of the lagoon he has never once, in Ikena's memory, been observed actually looking at. He is a careful man, the kind who orders the same lunch every day, so no one can accuse him of an inconsistency. And when his brother-in-law walks in unannounced at 4 in the afternoon and places a single sheet of Adeyemi letterhead on the desk between them, he does the careful thing first. He reads it. Then he reads it again, slower, buying time the way lawyers taught him to. Where did you get this? That's what you're leading with. Ikenna sits down without being asked. Not is it true. Not I'm sorry. You're asking me where I got it. I'm asking because it changes what I say next. Then say the true thing next, Deal. For once. Dealey sets the letter down very precisely, squaring its corners to the edge of the desk, a gesture Ikenna recognizes because his own hands have done the same thing under pressure. She came to me 2 weeks before the wedding, hysterical. A maid, Ikenna. 3 months pregnant, no family in Lagos to speak of, and you 2 days from marrying into a family that would have destroyed her socially the moment the story got out. Not because we're cruel, because that's simply what would have happened. I did what I thought was mercy. I gave her enough money to disappear with some dignity instead of being dragged through it in public. You gave her enough money to disappear so that I would never have the chance to make my own decision about my own son. You were 26 years old and about to marry into Evering. Two families had spent a generation building. What decision exactly did you want to make? The one you took from me. Ikenna's voice does not rise. It goes quieter instead, which is worse, and Dale, who has spent 30 years reading rooms for a living, hears the difference immediately. 9 years, Dale. My wife let me grieve a marriage that she spent the entire length of lying to me about the one thing that actually mattered. And you helped her do it, and then you sat across from me at Christmas every year since, asking about my business, like there wasn't a boy in emo state with my face. What do you want from me? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry it's come out this way. I don't want an apology. I want you to understand that I am recognizing him. Legally, publicly, completely. And if you or anyone in this family tries to make that difficult for me, or for Kioma, or for my son, this letter does not stay between two people in this office. Dila's jaw works once, the family tell, though he has never noticed Ikenna has one too, and for a moment something almost like for relief crosses his face before he edges it and puts it away. She would have wanted it kept quiet. Ronk, I mean. Even now. Ronk doesn't get a vote anymore, Ikenna says, standing. That's the one mercy of dying with a secret, Deal. You don't have to watch what happens when it gets out. He leaves the letterhead on the desk. He has photographs of it on his phone already, along with the transfer receipt sent to an email address only Musa and, as of that morning, a lawyer named Grace Bello have access to. He does not slam the door on his way out, because his mother raised him better than that even on the worst days, but he does not look back either. And somewhere behind him, he hears Dele Adeyemi pick up his desk phone and start dialing before the elevator has even arrived. He tells his mother before he tells anyone else outside the small circle who already knows. Beatrice Okafor is 71 years old, still sharp enough to run the household accounts by hand faster than the accountant Ikenna pays to do it electronically, and she listens to the entire story. The letter, the payment, the boy with her son's own, Tell tapping his fingers against a school notebook, without once interrupting. When he finishes, she is quiet long enough that he starts to worry he has broken something in her that even this family cannot afford to lose. I employed that girl for 2 years, she says finally. I taught her how I like my tea. I gave her a reference when she said she was leaving for Abuja, because I believed it, the same as you did. She shakes her head slowly. I sat at your wedding 3 weeks after she disappeared, and I remember thinking it was strange that nobody could tell me which family in Abuja had hired her. I let it go. I had a wedding to run. She looks at her son directly. We both let a great many things go that year because looking closer would have been inconvenient. You are not the one who paid her to vanish. No, but I am the one who employed her, fed her, watched her for 2 years, and never once asked myself why a girl that capable would leave a good position without so much as collecting her final wages. Beatrice reaches over and takes her son's hand, an unusual gesture for a woman who shows love mostly through logistics. School fees paid early, drivers sent without being asked, the right doctor called before anyone else thinks to worry. I want to meet him, not as an apology. As a grandmother meeting a grandson she is 9 years late for. She meets Nanamdi 3 weeks later, arrives at the Blue Gate with a car full of books she has clearly spent real money and real thought selecting, and spends the first hour of the visit doing something Ikenna has never once seen his formidable mother do with any of her actual grandchildren from her daughter's marriages. She asks Nanamdi questions and then genuinely waits, in total silence, for however he chooses to answer them. A nod, a shrug, a drawing pushed across the table instead of words. By the second visit, she has learned to play drafts badly on purpose, just often enough to keep him interested, and Nanamdi has started keeping a specific chair by the window free for her before she even knocks. Kioma lets him back through the gate on the fourth visit, not the first, and only after Musa, sent ahead alone, without Ikenna, at her own quiet insistence, sits in her front room for an hour and tells her everything that was in the tin trunk. She does not cry in front of Musa. She waits until he leaves, and then she sits on the same step Ikenna sat on 9 days earlier and lets 9 years of being the only person who knew the whole truth finally cost her something in front of no one but her own son, who watches her from the doorway and, not knowing what else to do with his hands, brings her a cup of water she doesn't ask for and doesn't drink. When Ikenna comes the fourth time, she makes tea neither of them wants and tells him the parts even the letter couldn't. I didn't take the money because I was greedy, she says. I took it because your wife sat in this exact kind of chair in a hotel room in Victoria Island and told that if I tried to keep the baby and stay in Lagos, she would make sure I never worked in that city again, and that whatever happened to my son growing up without a name attached to yours would be my fault for not protecting him properly. Bopley. I was 23. I believed her. I still think some days that she might have been right. The Ikenna Okafor I knew back then would not have chosen a housekeeper's son over that wedding, and I did not want my child raised by a man who resented him for existing. You don't know that. You don't know what I would have done. No, Kioma agrees. I don't. I made a decision about a man I only knew for one night, and then I spent 9 years being right about it, because you never once looked for me either. N- Not until Ronke was in the ground and you had nothing left to lose by finding out. It is not the version of the story where he gets to feel entirely good about showing up. He understands that, sitting in her kitchen with tea going cold in front of him, and he does not argue the point again. What he does instead, over the following weeks, is show up on Saturdays. He is bad at it at first, in the specific way rich men are bad at things they've never had to practice. He brings gifts too large for the house, offers to fix things that don't need fixing, talks too much to fill silences that Nanamdi, it turns out, does not need filled. It is Mama Adaobi, the old woman 2 compounds down, who has watched 3 generations of Umuoji children grow up wrong and right in roughly equal measure, who finally tells him, in the flat tone of a woman who has earned the right to say it, that boy does not need your money, Oga. He has been watching you for 3 Saturdays now to see if you come back after the ones where nothing exciting happens. So he comes back after the ones where nothing exciting happens. He learns, by the 5th Saturday, that Anamdi plays drafts the way some children play chess. Silently, ferociously, refusing to let an adult win out of politeness, resetting the board without a word every time he loses so he can study exactly where he went wrong. Ikenna loses 11 straight games before he starts actually trying, and loses 4 more after that. On the 16th game, sitting on an upturned bucket in Kioma's front yard, with the harmattan dust settling on both their shoulders. Namdi wins for the first time against a version of Ikenna that isn't holding back, looks up at him, the only direct eye contact of the whole afternoon, and allows, for exactly 1 second, something that is almost a smile. They have dinner together, alone, for the first time in 9 years, on a night in early October when Nanamdi is asleep and Mama Adaobi has installed herself in the front room specifically so the two adults can sit outside on plastic chairs without an 8-year-old's attention needing managing. It is not a date. Neither of them calls it that, and neither of them quite manages to talk about anything except Nanamdi for the first 40 minutes. His handwriting, his stubbornness at drafts, a tooth he lost that morning, and insisted on keeping in a small tin instead of trusting it to tradition. It is Kioma who finally asks the question neither of them has said out loud since the Blue Gate. What happens to this, she says, meaning the two of them, the plastic chairs, the specific quiet of sitting close to a person after the child has gone to bed once the lawyers are finished and the family has approved everything and there is nothing left to fix? I don't know, Ikenna says, and means it as a genuine answer, not a deflection. I spent 9 years assuming I already knew what kind of man I was. I would like some time to actually find out before I make promises to you I am not certain yet I can keep. That is a very careful answer. It is an honest one. I gave you a careless one 9 years ago in a service corridor, and it cost you 9 years of raising our son alone. I would rather be careful and honest than easy and wrong a second time. Kioma is quiet for a while, turning that over. I can live with careful, she says finally. I have gotten very good this past year at being patient with men who are trying. They do not resolve anything else that night. He drives back to Lagos past midnight, and neither of them mentions the dinner again for weeks. But something in the shape of the silence between them afterward is different than it was before. Less like two people managing a legal arrangement, more like two people who have quietly agreed to see what else might still be possible in their own time, without either of them needing to name it yet. Ikenna does not tell Nanamdi who he is. Not yet. That conversation he and Kioma agree belongs to her first, in her own words, on a day she chooses. She tells him on a Tuesday after school, sitting with him on the same step his mother once sat on alone. Ikenna is not there. He hears about it 2 days later, secondhand, the way a father who has waited too long to be one has to learn to receive the most important conversation of his life. Filtered, softened at the edges by a mother protecting her son, even in the retelling. He wanted to know why you never came before. Kioma tells him, over the phone, her voice carefully level. I told him some grown-ups take a long time to become brave enough to do the right thing, and that you were finally being brave. He asked if that meant you would stop coming once being brave got difficult. Again, a pause. I told him I didn't know. I told him that part was up to you, not me. Ikenna does not answer right away. Tell him, he says finally, that I already know it's going to get difficult. Tell him I'm coming anyway. It gets difficult inside of a week. Dele Adeyemi does not go to the newspapers. That would be too crude, too visible, the kind of move that leaves fingerprints. He does what men like him have always done instead. He talks. At the Ikoyi Club, over golf, he doesn't particularly enjoy. At a christening in Lekki, between the second and third rounds of small chops, to three separate members of the Meridian Board, framed as concern rather than accusation, a housekeeper's son, appearing conveniently after the widow's death, no paperwork, no witnesses beyond the boy's own face. And wasn't it worth asking whether grief had made the chairman vulnerable to being taken advantage of? The story reaches Umuoji before Ikenna does. A man neither Kioma nor anyone else in the village has ever seen before shows up at the Eek market on a Tuesday, in city shoes that have never once touched red laterite mud, buying nothing, asking everyone. How long has that woman lived here? Does the boy's father ever visit? Has she ever been seen around different men? the kind who might explain a fatherless child better than the story she is telling now. He makes the mistake of asking Blessing at the tomato stall, who has known Kioma since they were both girls carrying water on their heads and does not appreciate the implication even slightly. Which man, Blessing says, not lowering her voice, sent you to ask an old woman's granddaughter about another woman's reputation, and did that man pay you to say it? Or are you simply the type who enjoys it for free? The man leaves without buying anything, which in Umoji is its own kind of confession. By evening, three separate women have found a reason to walk past Kioma's gate and mention, in the studied casual tone of people who have already decided whose side they are on, that a stranger was asking rude questions and got exactly the answer he deserved for it. Mama Adaobi delivers the full report personally, arms folded, in the tone of a woman reporting troop movements. He is not from here. City shoes. He was asking Blessing at the tomato stall if you have a reputation. She allows herself for one moment something close to satisfaction. Blessing gave him one to think about instead. Kioma calls Akena that night, and for the first time since the gate, he hears something in her voice that isn't caution. It's fear. Not for herself, she makes clear, but for a boy who has just started, cautiously, to let a stranger sit close enough to lose at drafts to him. He is trying to make it look like I invented this, she says, like I saw an opportunity the moment Ronke died and manufactured a child to match it. He won't get away with that. You don't know that either. No, Akena says, but I know a lawyer who can make sure of it. Grace Bello has represented 3 generations of complicated Lagos money and has never once lost a case by being the person in the room who cared the most. She meets Akena at his office 2 days later with a single manila folder and none of the sympathy he half expects. First thing, she says, sitting down without being offered a chair. We do this properly, or we don't do it at all. That means an accredited paternity lab, not a family friend with a diagnostic clinic, not anyone with a personal connection to you or to the Adeamis, because the very first thing Dele's people will try, if this goes anywhere public, is to claim the results were arranged. I want a lab whose chain of custody would survive a challenge in federal court. There are 3 in Lagos that qualify. We use one of them, and we document every hand that touches that sample from swab to certificate. And if he tries to block it, contest it, he can't block a DNA test the boy's mother consents to. He can make noise about it, which he's already doing, what he's actually building toward, and I'd bet real money on this is a narrative fight, not a legal one. He knows the science isn't on his side. He's trying to win the story before the results come back so that by the time they do, half of Lagos has already decided what to think. Grace closes the folder. So we don't let him win the story. We take this in front of people whose opinion he actually can't buy or spread rumors around. Starting with your own family. My family is small. My father is gone. It's mostly Umuna at this point. Cousins, uncles, elders who haven't seen me since my father's funeral. Good, Grace says. Then that's exactly where we go first. The sample collection happens on a Wednesday at a private lab in Victoria Island that Grace has vetted personally. Ownership structure checked, no board member or shareholder with any connection to Meridian or the Adeyemi family. The technician, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Nwosu, who has clearly handled this exact situation more than once, explains the process to Kioma in the unhurried voice of someone used to nervous parents. A cheek swab. No needles, no blood. 30 seconds a sample. 2 swabs from Nanamdi, 2 from Akena, sealed in separate evidence bags, initialed by both parents and by Grace as an independent witness, photographed before anyone leaves the room. Why 2 each? Kioma asks, so that if anyone ever wants a second opinion from a lab with no connection to this one, there is an untouched sample sitting in a locked freezer to test it against, Dr. Nwosu says. It is not about doubting the first result. It is about making sure nobody can credibly claim there was a reason to. Namdi does not like the swab. It is not painful, but it is strange. A stick pressed against the inside of his cheek by someone he has never met, and he sits rigid through it with the particular dignity of a boy, determined not to make a scene about something he privately finds unpleasant. Ikenna, watching, recognizes the exact expression. He has worn it himself, in board meetings, more times than he could count. Afterward, in the waiting room, Nanamdi does something he has never done before. He climbs, without asking, into the chair beside Ikenna instead of the one beside his mother, sits close enough that their shoulders touch, and says nothing about it. Neither does anyone else. It takes 11 days for the results to come back. He visits Ronki's grave twice in those 11 days, which is twice more than he has visited in the 2 years since the funeral. He does not go to apologize to her, and he does not go to forgive her, because he has not decided yet whether either of those things is available to him. He goes both times because he finds he cannot hold the two versions of his wife in his head anywhere else. The woman who once sat up 3 straight nights with him when Meridian's stock cratered during the fuel subsidy crisis, saying nothing useful the entire time, except that she was there and was not leaving, and the woman who sat in a hotel room with a frightened 23-year-old and told her exactly what she needed to hear to disappear quietly. He remembers standing at the grave the second time, a night 4 years into the marriage, when Ronki had gone strange and quiet after a christening. Someone else's baby, someone else's easy joy. And he had asked what was wrong, and she had started to say something and stopped herself, physically stopped, a hand pressed briefly over her own mouth like she was catching a word before it escaped. He had let it go. He had always let things go with Ronke, assuming there would be time later to come back to them. He understands now, standing over a headstone with her name on it, and none of the truth beneath it, that whatever she stopped herself from saying that night was probably the only real chance either of them ever had at doing this differently, and that she chose, in that moment as in every moment before it, to keep protecting a decision instead of correcting it. He does not decide, either visit, that he forgives her. He decides instead that he does not have to resolve the question before he can do the next right thing, which is the only kind of peace available to him this particular March. The Meridian board meeting, where Ikenna addresses the rumors, directly happens 2 days after. Grace tells him 3 separate members have called her office fishing for confirmation of concerns about the chairman's judgment. He does not deny anything. He does not manage the story the way every instinct trained into him by 9 years of running a company screams at him to do. He stands at the head of a long table in a boardroom his father built, in front of 11 people who collectively decide whether shareholders keep trusting him with their money, and tells them the truth in roughly the same plain, unadorned order he will use with his own family 2 weeks later. I have a son, he says. He is 8 years old. His existence was hidden from me by my late wife and her brother, for reasons I understand better than I forgive. I am recognizing him, publicly and legally, starting now. If any of you believe that makes me less capable of running this company, I would ask you to explain specifically how choosing to tell the truth, at real personal cost, is evidence of poor judgment, because from where I am sitting, it is the first unambiguously good decision I have made in 2 years. Nobody says anything for a long moment. It is the company's oldest director, a man who worked alongside Ikenna's father for 3 decades, who finally speaks. Your father hid nothing in his life he did not have to, the old man says. It cost him deals, sometimes. It never once cost him a board's confidence. He looks around the table, daring anyone to disagree with him. I do not see a problem here. I see the first Okafor in a generation with the nerve to actually resemble his father. The vote of confidence, when Grace formally requests one out of an abundance of caution, is unanimous. The Okafor compound sits 40 minutes outside the city his father left to build an empire in, on land that has belonged to the family longer than the empire has existed, and Ikenna has been back exactly twice in the 2 years since his father's funeral. Both times for less than an hour, both times leaving before anyone could ask him to stay for a meal. He goes back a third time on a Sunday in late November, and this time he calls ahead, asking his father's younger brother, Uncle Sani, to gather whoever in the Umuna can be reached inside of 10 days. He does not tell them why. He tells them only that it concerns his father's name and that it cannot wait for Christmas. 14 people fit in the compound's main room on the day it happens, elders on the good chairs, younger cousins standing along the walls, a scattering of plastic chairs borrowed from a neighbor for the overflow. Grace Bellows sits near the front with a folder she has not yet opened. Musa stands by the door, not because anyone told him to, but because 11 years of habit put him there before he thought about it. Kioma sits beside Ikenna, in a dress Mama Adaobi helped her choose, holding herself the particular stillness of a woman who has spent 9 years being talked about and is now about to be talked about in a room she cannot leave. Namdi sits between them, a coloring book he is too old for balanced on his knees because Kioma thought, correctly, that his hands would need something to do. Dealey arrives 11 minutes late, which for a man that careful is its own kind of statement, with two of his own cousins flanking him like men who have been told there might be trouble and would prefer to look ready for it without actually expecting any. The eldest man in the room, Ikenna's father's last surviving brother, a retired schoolteacher named Pa Nwachukwu, who has broken more cola nuts at more family gatherings than anyone can count, opens the meeting the way he opens every meeting, with the cola nut itself, a short prayer, a request that whatever is said in this room be said with respect for the ancestors listening. Then he turns to Ikenna and says, simply, "You called us. Speak." Ikenna speaks for 4 minutes without notes. He does not perform grief, and he does not perform anger at delay, sitting 11 feet away with his arms folded. He states the facts the way Grace coached him to. Plainly, in order, without adjectives doing work, the facts can do better. 9 years ago, a son was born. His mother was kept from him through a payment his late wife arranged and her brother executed. The boy sitting beside Kioma Ize is that son. The chairman of Meridian Atlantic Group is asking his family, formally, to recognize him. "Show them," Grace says quietly when he sits down. She opens the folder. She does not read the letter aloud in full. She has advised against that, in private, calling it cruelty dressed as evidence. But she summarizes its contents accurately, holds up the transfer receipt for anyone who wants to examine it, and then places a single sealed document on the table in front of Pa Nwachukwu. This is the result of a DNA analysis conducted 11 days ago at an accredited laboratory with no connection to either family, she says. Both parties consented. The chain of custody is documented from the moment the samples were taken to the moment the results were sealed, specifically so that no one in this room or outside it can credibly claim these results were arranged. The probability of paternity is stated as 99.99%. I would ask the elders present, if they wish, to verify the seal is unbroken before I open it. Two of the older men do exactly that, passing the envelope hand to hand, checking a seal neither of them fully understands the science behind, but both understand the weight of. It is Dealey who speaks first before anyone asks him to, which Grace will say afterward was his second mistake of the day, the first being showing up at all. "I don't dispute the science," he says. "I dispute the framing. I acted to protect this family from a scandal that would have followed my sister to her grave and followed all of you afterward. I'm the villain in this story only if you ignore what would have happened otherwise." "You are the villain," says Pa Nwachukwu in the mild, unhurried voice of a man who taught secondary school for 31 years and has never needed to raise it to be obeyed. "Because you decided, alone, in a hotel room, that a woman's child was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be welcomed. Not because you protected your sister, because you did not once in 9 years consider that the boy himself might have a claim on this family that had nothing to do with anyone's reputation. He lets that sit for a moment. I knew your father, Deal. He would not have been proud of this. Deal has no answer for that. His cousins, flanking him, have found something interesting to look at on the floor. What happens now? Kioma asks quietly. The first thing she has said aloud since the meeting began is what I want to understand. Not for me, for him. She rests a hand on Nanamdi's shoulder. He has stopped pretending to color. Pa Nwachukwu stands slowly, the way men his age stand when the moment requires it, despite what their knees think about it. What happens now is what should have happened 9 years ago. Come here, small one. Namdi looks up at his mother. She nods once. He crosses the room, 6 steps, in total silence, every adult in it watching, and stands in front of a man he has never met, who takes both his hands in 2 much older ones and looks at him for a long moment before speaking, first in Igbo, then again for Kioma's sake in English. Namdi Okafor, the old man says, giving him, for the first time in his life, the second half of a name that was always his. You were born into this family, whether anyone told you so or not. Today we are only saying out loud what was already true. He breaks a fresh lobe of kola nut, presses a piece into the boy's palm, and closes his small fingers around it. Eat. You belong here. Nanamdi does not say anything. He does not need to. He eats the kola nut with the exact careful concentration he brings to every draft's move, and when he looks back at Ikenna, really looks, for the second time since the blue gate, something in his face has finally stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. Before the room moves on to food and the ordinary business of a family gathering, one of Ikenna's aunts, a stout, plain-spoken woman named Auntie Bisi, who has buried 2 husbands and never once in her life apologized for anything she did not mean, crosses the room to where Kioma is sitting and takes both her hands, unbidden. Nobody here has apologized to you yet, she says, and I think somebody should before we eat, so it is not left hanging over the food like a bad smell. I am sorry this family let you carry something alone that was never only yours to carry. That is all. You do not have to say anything back. Kioma does not say anything back. She nods once and lets herself, for the first time in 9 years, cry in front of people who are not her son. Deal leaves before the meal is served. No one stops him. 2 months later, quietly, without any public announcement, his name comes off the board of the family's property arm, and the reason given to anyone who asks is simply that he chose to step back. Nobody in the family corrects that version, and nobody needs to. Everyone in that room on the Sunday in November knows exactly what actually happened, and in a family that size, that turns out to be a harsher sentence than any newspaper story could have written. Ikenna does not gloat. He notices weeks later that he does not particularly want to. Nanamdi turns 9 that December on a Saturday, which nobody has to plan around because by then Saturdays already belong to Ikenna as a matter of habit rather than agreement. It is not a large party. Kioma does not want a large party, and Ikenna, for once, does not override her on the question of what his son actually needs versus what money can buy to compensate for 9 absent years. There is jollof rice cooked in a pot too big for Kioma's kitchen, borrowed from Mama Adaobi, who has strong and specific opinions about the ratio of rice to stock and shares them with anyone standing near the stove, whether they asked or not. There is a cake from a bakery in Oweri that Nanamdi picked out himself, chocolate, no decoration beyond his own name spelled correctly, which both his parents privately agree is the first cake he has ever had where that was true. There is Musa, off duty, eating a second plate he pretends he was not going to ask for. There is Beatrice Okafor in the good chair by the window, and Grace Bello, who was not officially invited and came anyway, because, she says, she has grown professionally attached to how this particular case turned out. Namdi does not make a wish out loud when the candle is lit, because he has never once in 9 years said a wish out loud to anyone, and nobody in that yard expects him to start now. He closes his eyes for exactly as long as the song lasts, opens them, and blows the candle out in one try. Later, after the plates are cleared and the smaller cousins have been carried home half asleep, Ikenna finds him sitting alone on the same upturned bucket where he first learned to lose at drafts, looking at nothing in particular, with the specific stillness of a boy doing math that has nothing to do with school. Ikenna sits down on the ground beside him, not the second bucket, the ground, because some conversations only work at the same height as the person you are having them with. Good birthday? He asks. Namdi looks at him for a moment. Then he does something he has never done before. Not once. The 4 months since a knock on a blue zinc gate changed both their lives. He leans sideways until his head rests against his father's arm and stays there, saying nothing, needing nothing said back. Ikenna does not move for a long time. Somewhere behind them, through the kitchen window, Chikiyoma watches the two of them sitting in the dark and does not go out to interrupt it. What nobody tells you about the part after the reveal is how much of it is just Saturdays. Not the Saturday of the Umuna meeting, that one gets told and retold, gets its own place in the family's memory the way big days do. What actually rebuilds something between a father and a son who missed 8 years of each other is the unremarkable ones, the ones with nothing exciting happening. By January, Akenna has learned that the drainage behind Kiyoma's house floods every time the rains come hard, turning the vegetable beds Kiyoma's mother planted 20 years ago into standing water that drowns half the pepper crop before anyone can save it. He does not hire someone to fix it. He buys a shovel, a real one, not a decorative one, the kind that leaves blisters, and spends 4 consecutive Saturday mornings digging a channel himself while Musa, who has appointed himself unofficial supervisor of this entire project, sits nearby offering opinions Ikenna did not ask for and is too tired to argue with. Namdi watches the first Saturday from the doorway. By the second, he is holding the second shovel, moving considerably less dirt than he believes he is moving, narrating nothing, needing no encouragement. By the fourth, when the channel finally holds through a real downpour and the pepper beds stay dry for the first time in memory, he does something he has never done in Akenna's presence. He laughs, a short, surprised bark of a sound, at the specific indignity of his father slipping in the new mud and landing flat on his back in a work shirt that cost more than most people's rent. He does not say anything. He does not have to. Ikenna, lying in the mud, laughing too hard to be embarrassed, understands it as the loudest thing his son has ever said to him. In February, the primary school in Umuoji holds its Harvest Exhibition, an annual event where every class displays a project and every child scans the crowd for whichever adult promised to come. Namdi's project is a hand-drawn map of the compound's drainage system, labeled with an 8-year-old's careful, uneven printing, credited at the bottom, in handwriting that took him 3 tries to get right, to "Me and my dad." He does not know Ikenna is coming. Kiyoma didn't tell him, on the theory that a promise kept without warning means more than a promise announced in advance, and anxiously awaited. When Ikenna walks in, 40 minutes late because a Meridian shareholder call ran over, and he left it mid-sentence anyway, Nanamdi is standing by his display board, pretending not to watch the door. He sees Ikenna before Ikenna sees him. He does not run over. He simply straightens, very slightly, the way a much smaller boy might straighten his shoulders before a photograph, and waits to be found. Mama Adaobi, watching from 2 rows back, with the particular satisfaction of a woman who has been right about something for months, leans over to Kiyoma and says, "You see." He stopped counting Saturdays somewhere around the 4th flood. The test that matters most, the one Ikenna will think about for the rest of his life as the night he actually earned something, comes in March, on an ordinary Tuesday that starts like any other. When Kioma calls him at 11 at night, with a fever spiking in her son's small body and no car of her own to get him to the clinic in Oweri. He does not call Musa. He does not think to. He is in his own car 11 minutes later, driving himself down roads he still half knows, arriving in Umuoji at half past midnight to find Kioma standing at the gate. The same latch, checked and unchecked and checked again in the last hour out of an old habit that has nothing to do with hiding her son this time, and everything to do with waiting for the one person who might help him. They sit together in the clinic waiting room until 4 in the morning. Namdi sleeps against Ikena's shoulder for most of it, too sick and too exhausted to maintain his usual careful distance, and at some point past 3, without waking, he reaches over and takes a fistful of his father's shirt in one small hand and does not let go. Ikena does not move his arm for the next hour, though it goes fully numb, because some math is not worth doing when the answer is obvious. The fever breaks by morning. Akena drives them home as the sky is starting to go gray at the edges and does not go back to Lagos at all that day. He sleeps 4 hours on Chioma's couch, wakes to the smell of her making tea he still doesn't particularly like, and understands somewhere in that exhausted, ordinary morning that this, not the letter, not the meeting, not the cola nut, is the thing that actually made him a father. He finds the notebook by accident, the way people find the things that matter most. It is April by then, and he is helping Nanamdi pack a school bag for a trip he's not fully paying attention to, and a folded piece of paper falls out of an old exercise book onto the floor. It is a form from months earlier, before the fever, before the harvest exhibition, back around the time of the Umuna meeting. A routine school registration slip with a line at the bottom marked Parent to Guardian. Namdi has filled it in himself, in the same careful, uneven printing as the drainage map, in a hand that clearly practiced the word more than once before committing to it on the page. Papa. He never told anyone he wrote it. He never asked Ikena to see it. Kioma, when Ikena shows her, presses her hand briefly to her mouth and says nothing at all, and neither of them mentions it to Nanamdi, because some things are stronger, left exactly where a child chose to put them, quiet, folded, already true. Musa retires from driving, officially 18 months after, the night he finally opened a tin trunk that had followed him through 3 house moves and 11 years of silence. Unofficially, he still drives Ikena twice a month because neither of them has quite figured out how to have the conversation about stopping. And because Ikena, if he is honest with himself, does not actually want to have it. What Ikena does instead, on the day Musa's youngest daughter finishes her nursing certification, is show up at the small graduation ceremony in Ikeja without being invited, sit at the back where nobody but Musa notices him, and afterward hand Musa an envelope that turns out to contain the deed to the house Musa has been renting for the last 9 years. Fully paid, fully his. No conditions attached, and no way to give it back. You kept something for 9 years that could have destroyed you the moment anyone found out you had it. Ikena tells him when Musa tries to refuse it, I am not paying you for that. I am only making sure you never again have to choose between doing the right thing and having somewhere to sleep. Musa does not have a clever answer for that. He puts the envelope in his jacket pocket, says nothing further about it for the rest of the evening, and drives Ikena home that night the same way he has driven him for 11 years. 2 car lengths back, engine idling a little longer than it needs to, waiting the way he has always waited for whatever comes next. By the time the rains come back in earnest, a full year after a knock on a blue zinc gate, Kioma has stopped checking the latch out of dread. She still checks it every evening, same as always, same 2 fingers resting on the metal for a moment before she turns away. But now it is only ever for the same reason anyone checks a gate at the end of the day. To make sure the people she loves can get in. A note before you go. The paternity testing, the legal acknowledgement process, and the family presentation you just heard about are real practices used every week by lawyers and families across Nigeria, not something invented for this story. What differs is the detail, how a kindred meeting is run, which court handles acknowledgement, how a state's customary law treats a case like this. Because those things change from community to community and state to state in ways one story can't cover in a single sitting. If anything in this story made you think about your own family, please with a licensed family lawyer where you live. Sit with a licensed family lawyer where you live. The Legal Aid Council of Nigeria offers free legal aid through offices in all 36 states, and the Nigerian Bar Association can point you toward a lawyer either way. I'm not a lawyer, and nothing here is legal advice. I wanted to tell a story about what it actually costs to keep a child a secret and what it costs differently to finally stop.